Hello, welcome to the 6th editions of our Essential Conference. This Essential Conference, as you may imagine, was supposed to be in presence, and it was supposed to be at Microsoft a few months ago. And in fact, we changed it to 4 events, to 4 conferences. This is the 3rd one. The first one was based on a survey we did on our alumni on the next normal. The second one was on leadership for sustainability a few weeks ago. And this is the 3rd one, which is on inclusive leadership. By the way, it is the one where we have the most registration. We had more than 300 registration. And the 4th one will be in January. We'll talk a little bit about it at the end of this one, and it's going to be on the future of work. Before starting, I would like to thank our sponsor, McKinsey. You know, we don't need to introduce McKinsey, but when you call McKinsey and Company on Google, I just had half an hour ago 21 million results in 0.86 seconds. So McKinsey will, and Alix de Zélicourt, a partner at McKinsey, will introduce this session. McKinsey has been very advanced in working on one aspect of inclusive leadership, and the most important aspect for the last years, but not the only one, which is Women Matter. McKinsey has done a lot of work on Women Matter, and we are very glad to have their input and their value and their moderation on this conference. We also have the support and the partnership of the Alumni Club of Women in Business. Insead has started, our beloved school has started a Women in Business Club, which in fact was opposite to other clubs which were started locally, was started basically globally. And we have a global club of alumni women in business. And Anne Demege is going to be talking to you about it and will introduce the rest of the conference. And obviously this is done in partnership with them, and we have quite a lot of alumni from all European countries listening to us today because they are part of the global alumni club in Women in Business. Before we start, we have to talk about webinar. You know, audience is muted, video off, and chat box disabled, but please use the Q&A tab to ask question for the panelists. We'll have questions after each group after each part of the structure of the presentation. The webinar is being recorded, and it will be sent to you in a couple of days. You can contact at inseadalumni.fr if you have a technical issue, and all of you, keep the conversation flowing. It's now my pleasure to introduce Anne Demege. Anne Demege is an alumna of the Insead MBA. She's also a board certificate from ESSEC. But, nobody is perfect, but she's also a board certificate for ESSEC. She really led in her career. She led business transfer in her starting career because she has a long years to go still. She led business transformation projects at Exxon, Johnson & Johnson in Europe and China. And she's focusing her jobs on her career on sustainable business models. So Anne, without further waiting, please take the lead.
Thank you very much, Thomas. It's really my pleasure to be here. And thank you very much for this introduction, and also for this opportunity to run the number 3 of a French Essential series jointly with Insead Women in Business. I do believe this is one of the first, but I'm sure it's not the last one. So very briefly, I'd like, before we jump into the topic, I'd like to take this opportunity to introduce Insead Women in Business. Indeed, as Thomas mentioned, it's a global club created within the Alumni Association just in 2016. And we have 17 very active local clubs just around the globe with only one objective: promote gender equality. So our objective is to create awareness, to support and share best practices for Insead women alumni to thrive in their business role. But let me emphasize one thing, and that's the people who know me know what I'm going to say. This is not a place, and this is not a club for women only, with only women. You know, there are some people who are saying that men are coming from Mars and women from Venus. But very pragmatically, I say that we are all together on one same planet, and we've got to make the most out of it. So please come and join us, because we need everyone. And by the way, our executive committee is fully balanced. So inclusive leadership, our topic for tonight, is obviously an enabler to reach just our objective. Indeed, when we talk about inclusive leadership, gender is part of this discussion and a key dimension, but obviously it's not the only one. And during our panel tonight, we will see and we will discuss this and all of the and illustrate all of the other dimensions as well. Gender, however, has a key advantage. It's to be measurable and trackable. And you'll see it's also useful whenever you're going into the implementation. So as Thomas mentioned, there are numerous existing reports showing diversity and inclusion drive higher performance in business and higher innovation as well. To the point that we see today more and more organizations setting some objectives. I bet most of you heard recently that the German government and even the NASDAQ set these objectives. But obviously, in order to reach a right level of diversity, you also need the right level of leadership. It's critical because it's just mandatory to set the right context and the right culture. So tonight, with our fantastic panels of inclusive leaders, we will answer 3 simple questions. So, what is it that we define as inclusive leadership? Why is this so critical? And how, are we making sure that it's happening in the organization to bring benefits to the business? McKinsey, our sponsor tonight, as Thomas mentioned previously, is a key leader in that field. We are extremely lucky to have Alix de Zélicourt, associate partner with McKinsey, share her views and moderate our panel of inclusive leaders. Alix, in particular, has published the McKinsey Women Matters report, and I highly recommend that anybody who's just interested into the topic is looking at them. And before I hand over to her, I'd like to do a quick test among the audience and to ask you a very quick and simple question. We are going to have a poll happening, and I'd like all of you to tell me how would you rate your company today in terms of inclusive leadership? 1 meaning very low, 5 meaning, well, it's fabulous, and I'm very happy and in my company today. And in that case, I'd like you to reach out, because I think you've got best practice to share. So you've got 30 seconds to fill the questionnaire, and during this time. Oh, I see that there is written host and panelists can vote. So I'm not sure. Okay, so and then during this time, just I see you've got the Q&A session just who are at the bottom of the screen. So please use that during all of the panel. And I hope that now we're going to see soon the poll result that should be coming pretty soon. And it's going to give us a view about why you're here, most of you, if ever it's really because you want to find the solutions of how to become more an inclusive leader, or if ever you've got just more best practices to share. Let me see, the results are coming. Okay, so we've got quite a good spread. With, yeah, so most of the people are between 3 and 4, so still some progress to be done, but obviously, you know, I think we've got just people quite happy with just the inclusiveness of their leadership or in their organization at the moment. So I would say, but still, you know, it's almost 50% being in the bottom, 1, 2, 3. So I think it's the perfect time now to hand over to Alix and to start answer all of his questions. So thank you. And Alix, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Anne, for the introduction. Good evening, everyone. So for the next 60 minutes, we're going to be together to discuss the topic of inclusive leadership. I will first quickly introduce the topic and share with you some perspectives about this, coming from various McKinsey projects and papers. Then I will move to our panel to ask about their perspectives and insights. The discussion will be organized around 3 topics, and for each topic, you will have the opportunity to ask questions to our 3 panelists. So let's start with a short introduction. Before going deep into the topic of inclusive leadership, I would like to share some concepts and what they mean. First, diversity. Diversity is about who is represented: genders, races, religions, ethnic backgrounds, disabilities, etc. It can be measured with numbers and statistics at each stage of the organization. Second, equity. Equity refers to equality of opportunity for each subgroup and person in the organization. It is measured through the norms and practices in place that ensure identity is not predictive of opportunities. In other words, one organization can be diverse, but not fair. Similarly, it can be equitable, but not diverse. Finally, inclusion. Inclusion is an overarching concept that addresses what people experience. It is a degree to which organizations embrace all employees and enable them to make meaningful contributions. Employees' perception is typically used to measure the degree of inclusiveness. So why do those concepts matter? Our research shows that there is a strong correlation between diversity, equity, inclusion, and performance. We basically see 5 ways that diversity, equity, and inclusion impact performance. First, striving to be diverse, fair, and inclusive allows you to be competitive and will win the war for talent because you engage a large pool of potential prospects and you come in with a competitive edge. Second, by bringing broad views and backgrounds around the table that will allow more debiasing, a company improves the quality of decision-making. Third, it increases the customer insight and innovation. Indeed, if your company reflects your customer base, you are better equipped to understand and serve it. Fourth, it drives your employees' motivation and satisfaction as it lowers the real and perceived systemic barriers to professional advancement. Finally, it helps a company improve its own image, both internally and externally. The McKinsey research offers several deep dives, and one of them, mentioned before, the Women Matter series, is about the impact of gender diversity. In this research, we found out that companies that have 3 women or more in their boards have a better average return on equity and a better EBIT margin. So, if we assume that there is a business case behind all this, if we assume diversity, equity, and inclusiveness bring better performance, why aren't all companies just jumping on the bandwagon? And why do we have so little diversity at the top? By polling thousands of companies around the world, we found out that the prevailing leadership style remains a barrier. 40% of women we talked to feel they do not fit for the top. More precisely, they do not think their leadership and communication style is compatible with the prevailing leadership style required to be effective in a C-level position. In other words, their perception of equity and inclusion is very low. However, when asked the same question, 70% of men believe that women's leadership style is compatible with top management position. We do not know who is right and who is wrong. We know, however, that excoms and boards are far from being diverse. So what does it take to change this? Our research talks a lot about women, but the truth is, if you get this right with women, you can get it right for all types of diversity. If you make leadership styles more inclusive in the hope of getting more women at the top, there will be a virtuous circle on all kinds of backgrounds or orientations. We believe that getting more women to the top is driven at the societal, institutional, and individual level. This means companies alone, or individuals alone, probably cannot change the situation. Governments need to act by providing an institutional framework that incentivizes diversity through tax, legislation, or infrastructure. This means there is no one-size-fits-all roadmap. At company level, one can provide its employees with the right ecosystem to thrive and commit to diversity, equity, and inclusion as a strategic objective. In companies, an ecosystem is required to make this happen. The ecosystem starts at the top with a CEO commitment and a cascade to its management team, translated into programs, processes, and policies. Top management should be a role model to the employees and track progress against targets like they would do for any other strategic priority. A key success factor is a commitment in the long term. Getting this ecosystem right cannot be done overnight. It takes time. It requires persistence, even in downturns and crises. Inclusive leadership is more needed than ever to bring us together and get through difficult times. As mentioned before, change starts from the top and from a vision. It's my great pleasure today to introduce you to 3 amazing leaders who will share with us their experience and learnings about this topic. We have with us today Janet Dekker. She's the Executive VP for Human Resources at Air France-KLM, and she's also an Insead alum. Juan Ignacio Amat is the Managing Director of Jacobs Douwe Egberts, and he's also an Insead alum. Mamou-Mani is the co-founder of Open Group and the co-founder of Jamais Sans Elle. Welcome, Janet, Juan, and Guy. For the 3 of you, please make sure that your microphone is now on and that you turn on your video. Quick reminder to the audience, you can ask your questions through the Q&A box. So starting with the core of today's concept, I'm turning to our panel to ask the first question. What do we mean by inclusive leadership? What is your understanding of this concept? Let's maybe start with you, Janet.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Alix. Inclusive leadership for me is really looking at cognitive diversity. And when I say cognitive diversity, is have on board that people see the world, see your business through different lenses, be it gender, which is more easily visible and measurable, but also from different schools, different nationalities, different experiences. And when I say that, it also means, that you have leaders who are able and willing to deal with those different perspectives. And so that is a quality that is maybe not for everybody. Maybe not everybody wants to include or wants to have to deal with different perspectives. As a leader, then you have to bring those together. If it improves decision making, because the quality of your decision is a good one, you need a leader then who is able to make a decision out of those different perspectives. So I am a firm believer of what I call this cognitive leadership. But I do know also from what I've seen and what I observe that it is hard for leaders sometimes, and we can see it in crisis mode right now, to deal with all those cognitive differences and with those different lenses.
Thank you, Janet. So Guy, maybe can you share with us your perspective?
Yes, in fact, I will start by making the difference between a leader and a manager. In fact, in the story, the manager is coming from a hierarchical organization, and the leadership is coming from the expertise. And I think that it's really important because its positioning is not top-down, but it is obvious. What we know is that company should welcome diversity and gender diversity. In fact, when you are a leader, you need to hear what is your market, what wants your customers. And I think that if you have not this diversity, you will not understand very well what your market wants. The second point is that in my sector, which is the digital sector, the main problem, the first problem that we have is to attract people. And by the way, if you have not this diversity and your mixity in your company, you cannot attract the good people and you will lose the war of talents.
So Juan, you are coming from the B2C industry. Do you have any reaction about this?
I would start by doubling down in Janet's points, which is included leadership for me is consists of surrounding yourself by different points of view, ultimately to encourage dissent as you work. And why is it simple? Encouraging dissent avoids falling into group thinking, or you can call it more technically collective biases. And as you avoid this group thinking, you're making sure that each fundamental discussion is having a broader perspective and that you are making higher quality decisions. And with those higher quality decisions, driving better performance. So maybe if I take it from a different angle, whenever you see yourselves in a business context, getting too quickly to an agreement and a course of action around fundamental and complex strategic points, immediately get an alarm system close to you, because you have the risk of being falling in collective group thinking, and that's a signal of not having an inclusive leadership in place.
Thank you, Juan. Thank you, Juan. So I think that the cognitive perspective seems to resonate with most of you. Janet, earlier you mentioned that probably not everyone can do this, and it requires something specific. You mentioned consistency. Can you maybe elaborate for us what you mean through this?
Well, what I mean is that I think organizations and also leaders can start by recognizing for themselves that it doesn't come naturally or it doesn't come organically. So you have to make it a point that, that you find it important. For example, we're all facing this crisis. We all have to reinvent situations, rethink how we serve customers, rethink, in our case, how we bring passengers back on board with trust and in health and safety. And so you don't do that with the same mindset that we had before. So you do that with different, maybe different ways of thinking. You have to trigger that because it does, I think it doesn't come natural. And this, I've seen, I see it in this business where it is it's really airline dominated, a little bit more male dominated, certainly. And in a previous company where it was, beauty was more female dominated, and then we had to realize like it's not possible that we're gonna rethink and re-innovate ourselves if we all think alike. We must make it a point to look where we recruit from, to diversify the source where we recruit from, and also diversify our career tracks. And even, I would say even today, when we say, well, in the managerial positions, we don't have enough mix. It's not only not enough gender mix, but also everybody seems to come from the same department. Why is that? Oh, it's because those careers, those who come from that specific department, they are favored and they are welcomed in other places. So we need to look for where can we find leaders who can deal with those multiple perspectives? Where are the places where you can learn that? So that's why I'm saying diversity and inclusion also for me comes with changing of your mindset, but also changing of the behaviors that you're going to look for in your leaders.
I think it makes total sense, Janet. And you mentioned a few examples from your industry. Guy, can you maybe share with us how it looks like in your area of expertise?
Yes, I agree with Janet. And to me, the work-life balance is one of these hotspots. In Open, we are trying to treat this problem. We do not start meeting after 6 p.m., for example, and we are really, really enthusiastic to the maternity leaves or the paternity leaves. It's not an issue for us. And why, for me, it's very important. It's that because I think that this fight, it's not only for women. Regularly, in our sector, people are saying, oh, the women are not going in the digital because they don't respect the work-life balance. And I think that it's true, but I don't understand why it's only for the woman. And I think that when the people are fighting for this balance, I think it's also very good for the man. And I think also that the reputation of the company now is based on this kind of message. And I think that it's very important for a company like Open, because we are, well, like I said before, in the situation of this penury of competences, and to give this message that we are respecting this work-life balance.
Okay, I can see it's a topic close to your heart. Thank you, Guy. A quick note to the audience: you have 5 minutes left to ask your questions. Back to the panel. I think I would be very interested to hear if you have met someone in the course of your career or your personal life that you think he or she was actually this inclusive leader or displayed those inclusive traits that we are currently portraying. Juan, did that ever happen to you?
Well, yes, I have had the chance to work for many inclusive leaders in the 21 years I've been developing my professional career. Most of them shared two fundamental characteristics. On one side, back to the point we discussed before, They were people that encouraged, challenged within their teams, coming from their teams to them. And the second trait or second characteristics these people shared is that they listened more than they talked. Okay, so and those, just to share some examples, I have had the chance to work with diverse leaders that have a phenomenal impact within the fast-moving consumer good industry in which I work, and for providing some examples that are well-known or resonating, I have in mind Indra Nooyi, who was PepsiCo's CEO and today works as a board member in Amazon. I have Ramon Lahuarta, who actually substituted Indra and is today acting as a CEO of PepsiCo. I had the chance to work very closely to Laxman Narasimhan, who is today CEO of Reckitt Benckiser and who is a McKinsey alumni. And I'd highlight today also our current CEO in JD Peet's, the company I work for, Fabian Simon. Public profiles, well-known global executives, which share this common trait of inclusiveness in the way they lead teams.
Thank you, Juan. Maybe same question to you, Janet. Do you have some specific people or situations in mind?
Yeah, I was thinking of a person who was a leader with whom I worked in many years in Sodexo. His name was Albert George. But also, I think I'm in a specific situation that being Dutch, I have not worked in my own country. So I have met people outside of my own country who knew that I would bring a different perspective, who would maybe need a little bit of time to understand the culture. So I worked with people who will say, well, come and join because we're gonna make it work. And it was not obvious from the beginning that it would work. Also, another boss that I worked with who absolutely recognized, oh, it's so hard to work with, to be inclusive, but it's so important that we do it. And I think that's very honest. And I think Juan said, you have people who listen more, you have people who ask questions. And I think that awareness of people's own bias, I think that is remarkable. And the organization, and if it's authentic, then the organization sees that and it shows, and that will make the whole difference. Absolutely.
Guy, you're the last one on this question. Do you have someone that came to mind when you heard this question?
First of all, I have many examples because all the leaders who are involved in the association Jamais Sans Elle are really examples of that. I think about people like Carlo Purasanta, the CEO of Microsoft, or Gérard Carsanti, the CEO of SAP, and Xavier Alberti, CEO of Les Collectionneurs, it's an hotels network. And all these people, in 300 others, took the commitment to participate at a round table, at a meeting, if there is not at least a woman. And I think that they give the signal of their very important commitment. And by the way, I can add someone that I respect very much, which is Pascal Demurger, the CEO of the MAIF, because really when I hear him, I don't know him personally, but I wrote his book, I hear him very often on the round table, and I'm absolutely convinced that it's a very good example of what is an inclusive leader.
Thank you very much. I'll now pick some questions from the audience that I'm receiving, and let's start maybe with the first one. Can you give us a practical example on how diversity helped tackle a business challenge efficiently? So I don't know who wants to go first on this one. Have you ever had the situation where, because you had a diverse group of people, you saw more efficiency in the output?
I can give an example. in my previous life, as you know, Sephora is a large network of, is a beauty retailer, not just stores, but also, you know, the e-commerce. And at the time, we were ahead of tremendous growth, and we were thinking like, wow, how can we build that growth? Where will the people come from? You know, who is going to lead our stores? Who's going to lead those sales? And then we said, and then we took, and we also said, it can't be that everybody makes the traditional career like your commercial director and then you become the country manager, because then everybody will like the same, and there's not enough commercial directors. And so we took the job of what does a country lead do, we sliced it, and then we identified, oh, there are other ways to get there. And so it showed that you can come from supply chain, you can come from merchandising, you could come, of course, from commercial. But it also showed like we diversified our pool by also looking at, oh, there's more there is than just only one track that leads up to the top. And that also helped in, oh, wow, now we have a diverse pool of people, and not everybody working in the top of the pyramid, you know. That was an example.
Thank you, Janet. Juan, I saw you nodding just before. So do you have any situation that comes to mind?
Plenty, both in avoiding bad decisions and also accelerating business performance. Maybe the more classic is avoiding bad decisions. In fast-moving consumer goods, you're all the time developing concepts around products and advertising that hopefully are triggering consideration and liking for your brands. I have seen situations in the development of advertising where the presence in the room of a person coming from a different background to the majority of the people that have developed a piece of advertising have put on the table an alarm signal about a specific advertising, possibly alienating. Of course, the debate also is rich, and you have people that agree, people that do not agree, but at least that dissent allowed us to test with consumers two different versions of the same campaign. One with the potential alienating factor, the other one without it. We confirmed with our target consumers that indeed one of the routes was extremely controversial and alienating. And to that, we had to spend double on testing, but we clearly avoided a very bad impact of something that was defined to trigger brand consideration and not the other way around.
Thank you, Juan. What about the tech world, Guy? How does diversity helps you tackle business challenges?
Oh, I can give a simple example if you want. Before making business with big companies, you have to be selected. And what we saw now is that one of the main questions in the selection process is how you manage your diversity, your mixity, how you manage your environmental issues. And I think that now you have a direct impact in the business of your social behavior.
Okay, well, that makes a lot of sense. Maybe a quick follow-up question that we're receiving in the meantime. How do you prioritize between different types of diversity? And do you even prioritize? Juan, maybe if you want to start.
Yeah, thank you. We have started by the one that in a way is more flagrant, more present, and more visible, which is gender diversity. And in that sense, working in France, the government also has helped us by ensuring that there's a men-women equality index tracked compulsory, on a compulsory basis by all companies. We landed in good ratios there. So actually we started from a ratio of 97% versus a perfect parity, which would be at 100. It's good to keep that KPI close because actually we moved from 97 to 94 because suddenly the weight of women started to go a bit too high. So we were getting unbalanced on that side. It comes a little bit with the industry too. But then as we said, hey, we seem to be okay here, we then launched other areas. And for 2021, we are having different taxes on diversity and inclusion, fundamentally intergenerational, equality of opportunities. So the concept of equity that you introduced, Alix, on your first charts. And also a big agenda on the disability, which we triggered 2 weeks ago by sharing with the whole team, preparing very well Semaine du Handicap, the week of disability that happened in France a couple of weeks ago. So we found new ways of expression to work and close the gaps. Once the initial one, which was gender, we measured and we thought it was in a good place to start with.
Okay. Janet or Guy, do you have any follow-up on this one?
Well, very different. I think there's one example that is in a previous life where we included a lot of people with disabilities. And to be very honest, I was a little skeptical in the beginning because we did it because there were regions where it was very hard to find people. But when we succeeded in making to include these people with disabilities, I mean, it was amazing. It is amazing what that did to the rest of the team in terms of performance, in terms of happiness at work, in terms of decrease of absenteeism. It was unbelievable. It really created it gave so many different dimensions. And then so it was very measurable. I think to measure how diversity lead to to increased performance is more a conviction. I think if your business does not reflect, the people, the customers who you are serving, I can only imagine you're gonna overlook a lot of aspects in your business. You're gonna make mistakes, So hopefully you don't let it come to too many of those mistakes. But yes, I think there is a strong link. But I think in a company, in your businesses, I think it is harder to measure because you don't have a baseline. Like that, then we were not inclusive. We didn't do it right. We're all when we manage diversity and we are demonstrating inclusive behavior, then we do it, and hopefully we do it for the right cause, and we do see that it leads to positive business outcome.
Thank you, Janet. I think it's a perfect transition to our second topic of today, and the second topic is really this link between inclusive leadership and performance. Having in mind performance can be of many kinds. So, Janet, you started discussing exactly this, but can you maybe share some examples of what you've seen in terms of performance, either maybe at KLM or your former companies?
I think today we see when you do like many other companies, we lead a lot of transformation tracks, and I think we were very conscious of having real diverse and really cognitive diverse people in each track. So then when you have a customer experience track, that you have people from with different lenses on that track, and when you have to be, of course, more performing, or if you how to manage your outstations, that you look at it with through different set of eyes, and that you do come to other solutions. And so that is almost the positive side of crisis, that people do seize that, and leaders do seize that opportunity, like, wow, there's an opportunity not to miss this, and to rethink what we are doing for better performance at less cost and better service for the customer and more agile, etc. So I think we have seen that in the environment where I am today, and in previous environment we had a growth problem, so to speak, and so that's why we opened up and were more willing and able to take risk, and took nominations and promotion decisions that were not so obvious, but that we accepted, and that I think we then also made it a point to say, well, we're going to make it. We're going to help you and going to give you such support so that we're going to assure that you're going to succeed, because we knew that was the right thing for the business to do. But also being open to accept risk is also part of behavior. Are you open for it? And then are you willing to accept the consequences to make sure that it takes some energy to make it work? Those are leadership behaviors, definitely.
Thank you, Janet. Just a quick reminder to the audience, the Q&A box is still open, so feel free to ask them. Back to you, Guy. I think this link of leadership and performance, you seem to be adamant that it really exists.
Yes, I'm absolutely convinced. By the way, I have to say that in our sector of the digital, we have not difficulty with the diversity. No discussion about hiring these different people coming from difficult neighbor, no question of religion, no question of color. Everybody is welcome, and very happy to welcome them if they have the good study. And I think that one of the main issues of the diversity in France is to encourage these young people to make the good studies. In the other sense, the main difficulty, and I can repeat it every time, is the attraction of the woman. And I think that it's absolutely crucial, because you can imagine one of the organization of Open is what we name services center. You can have 50 people in the same room in an open space who are working on a project. How you can imagine the atmosphere of this open space if you have 90 or 95% of men? And I think that it's absolutely important to make a balance and to have at least 30–40% of women, to have really a good atmosphere, a good way of work, and good exchange. And also, like I said before, to understand better their customers and their needs. And it's absolutely clear that we need to change that in the digital area. Just for the information of the Insead alumni, is that we said every time that there is 30% of women in the digital industry in France. It's true, but you are including transversal jobs. If you take only the technical jobs, you are around 10 to 15%. And by the way, you can find that in the founders of the startup, you have only 10% of women. And really in Open, we are focused on this issue. And I am very proud that we have this score of the men-woman equality index at 94 for the second year. And I think it's one point very important, because you can say what you want to attract women, that they are welcome, that you will have very good conditions of work. You can have this balance because your work time and personal time. But I think that the first point is the salary equality. And I think it's a crucial point. And by the way, to say that to the young girls who are starting their study, and to say you can go in this sector because you will have this respect.
You should be shouting that everywhere, Guy. I think it would certainly echo with many people. What about you, Juan? How do you see this?
Yeah, if we were talking about link between diversity and business performance.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, I work in a very universal category, which is coffee. Today, coffee is consumed at least once a year in 92% of French households. And at JD, we have a mission for ourselves, which is democratizing coffee. So giving to each person the coffee they want, This has many expressions. This has an expression on affordability. Today, we have cups of coffee sold in grocery, as a channel, which cost 5 euro cents per cup, and this goes up to 50 euro cents per cup. Okay, so the spread is phenomenal, but also the type of coffee. You have a type of coffee called Robusta that is consumed in the north of France, where actually in the west of France, people will have Arabica type of coffee. If you go to the east, next to the German border, people will have coffee beans that then they will grind in their own machines. And when you stay in the big cities like Paris, Lyon, and the Côte d'Azur region, people will consume coffee in capsules. So if I am attacking a category that is so broad in terms of affordability and consumption habits, and I want to do it in 92% of French households, how come I am not going to have a representative sample of that diversity in my company? I would be missing business opportunities. It's as simple as that.
Indeed, thank you, Juan. Maybe because you got me at the Lyon, Paris, and the comparison between the regions. We have here Janet from the Netherlands. We have you, and we have Guy. Do you have a view on the differences in appreciations of inclusion and performance across countries? Because I'm sure that the French perspective is probably different from the Dutch perspective or from the Spanish perspective. And Janet, given you work in a binational company, maybe you have a view on this.
Yeah, I can give some comments on it, and I have to be very biased. I have to be bias aware because I've worked outside of my own country for many years. But not so long ago, I spoke at a French-Dutch meeting, and we also spoke about those differences. And there is this difference in the Netherlands that you do have a lot. There's a very high percentage of women who are working part-time. They're working. It's allowed to work like 24 hours or 20, and also that gives. That gives less opportunities for women to achieve top jobs, but it is also a result of, and I think it's showed on your introductory slides, Alix, is about there's a system in the Netherlands where there's the childcare in the Netherlands is not organized the same way as it is in France. So economically, it's a very tough equation. If you are going to work full time and then you have to make sure that someone is taking care of the children, that organization is very different in France compared to the Netherlands, and I think you see some of that as well in Germany, and so today, I mean, also in the Dutch Parliament, the discussions about do we impose percentages on boards, etc. Those discussions are very different in the Netherlands than they are in France. And I do see also, a difference between KLM and Air France. Now, of course, it makes a difference that at the head of Air France we have a female CEO, and that does create in itself a dynamic in a company. By looking differently and also by the track record that she has in the company. So yes, it does set something different in terms of cultures, definitely. Yeah.
And thank you, Janet. And Juan, you've been working for quite a long time in France. I understand it's not your native country, but do you have a view on how France is comparing versus some others?
Well, I'm coming from Spain for full disclosure, and maybe it's just boosting on something that is shared in both cultures, which is maybe coming from a Latin culture, is the full appropriateness of having feelings and passion around your work, which might be a trait not so much shared in other cultural setups. In France in general, specifically in the team I'm leading, JD France, people understand diversity as part of a virtuous circle. It's clearly a purpose-driving factor. which is triggering engagement, identification or adherence to the company mission, and it helps putting business performance objectives in a broader context. Okay, so financial performance and in-market performance, which of course is part of our responsibility and our engagement vis-a-vis our company, are not alone. There are engagement around progressing in KPIs around diversity that are making the picture broader, triggering and accelerating the level of engagement with the company mission, and ultimately seeing business performance in parallel and not as exclusively the only objective to pursue. In my view, specifically in France, having a strong diversity agenda, triggering high purpose around what we're doing is a fundamental tool to fight against cynicism and detachment or disengagement between the person, the colleague, and the institution or the company he or she is working for.
Thank you, Juan. We have a first question coming to the audience, and I would like to hand it over to Guy. And it's actually a question I've been asking myself for a very long time, but someone is asking if performance is recognized, why is diversity not higher? And why don't you get more diversity, especially in your industry, Guy? What is happening?
We should start by make the difference between diversity and mixity. I think that we have to insist on it. It's not the same issue. The diversity is how we welcome minorities, or the women are not a minority. And I think that for us, and I suppose that the question is about mixity and not diversity, because it's not an issue of the diversity, like I said before, on our industry. And I think that many reasons about this difficulty. And by the way, I can reboot on your previous question. 10 years ago, a guy of Google in States said, okay, the IT and the digital is not for women because they have not the good brain and they have not the good qualities. And I was at this time the chairman of the French IT and Digital Association, and I made an article against that because I was furious. And for two reasons. I have the proof that it's ridiculous for two reasons. The first one is that when I started my studies, we had at least the same number of women that the men for these studies. And by the way, I recommend you the movie Les Figures de l'Ombre, which is the start of the IT at the NASA in the 60s, and with Black women who were the first developers in the NASA. The second argument is that when you see the other countries, you can see, for example, India, Indonesia, South Korea, Morocco, Tunisia, South America, and in these countries, you will have exactly the same number of women and men in this industry. I say that just for explaining to this question that it's not a question of gender. The science, the IT, have not a question of gender. It's not a question of man or woman. It's cultural question. And I think that we have, by the way, to work for the beginning of the scholarity to teach very small girls to the coding and to explain, by the way, to the parents and all the environment that it's not when you are deciding a job, it's not a question of gender, and the woman can choose this kind of studies. And you can see that when you are working on it, for example, Sophie Vigier, who is the director of the École 42. When she arrived, it was only 5% of women in the École 42, and she made a proactive program, and today we are at around 30%.
Okay, thank you, Guy. If I go back to you, Juan, maybe, you know, because when I read the question coming from the audience, you know, why is diversity not higher if it's actually a driver of performance? What is your take on this? What's happening? Why do companies do not tackle this as a real business issue?
I think the overall topic of cognitive biases, which is becoming huge in research and in leadership theories, has only come of that importance relatively recently. And in a way, group thinking has been dominating the culture of many companies, of most companies. That's what has taken us to where we are today. Little by little, and with thought leaders like McKinsey on one side, or the example of inclusive leaders that deliver out of the average performance, this is coming to a common understanding. But it takes a while to change where we are. And as I read the other day, in many cases in the topic of gender diversity, it is like a matter of female leadership backfill than the fact that some men at the top are just well where they are and they don't want to move. So in a way, it's about time and possibly the use of instruments like quotas, where we could talk a little bit later. But more importantly, and ultimately, back to my initial point, the recognition of group thinking and cognitive biases, which is only coming to scale recently.
Yeah, and if I can add something, Alix, I also think there is something not comfortable in dealing with diverse perspectives. And I also think when there is this crisis, there are different ways how we can react. We say, well, it's an opportunity, let's put different views on it and let's tackle the problem with the different lenses on that problem. But there's also the view, if you're not skilled or maybe not so sure of yourself as a leader, it is easier to go towards the group think, to deal with people who are very like-minded, and then come easier to discussions. I mean, in crisis, we say we have to go faster, you need to have tighter teams, be quicker, and come to decisions. I mean, that's the downside. Also, that's a risk that I think some of the organizations face. It does come with discomfort to deal with different perspectives.
No, indeed, Janet, I think it's a difficult road, and I think that brings us to our third and last topic of today is we have now a better understanding on the issue and the link with performance, and also many people have been asking in the Q&A, how do we start? What are the small steps each of us can take tomorrow? So Janet, when you look at inclusive leadership, what do you start? Where do you start, and what do you do?
I think you have to, I don't believe there's a recipe, but in all companies and all organizations, there are what I call different hubs where the change need to be visible. And I think some of your hubs give a visible change maybe in the next few years, and that is nomination at a COMEX, or that is measuring and being transparent about how you measure, let's say, the top 10% of all your managerial positions. And then you also select some activities that give you results maybe in 2-3 years, and that is go with your managers of diverse backgrounds and diverse thinking to the different schools and the sources where you're going to find your people, have them explain what they do, and it could be both in IT and it could be in also in engineering and maintenance. Let people know the diversity also of the different expertise areas where people can land, but that give you, so that you speak to not always the same school, not always the same diplomas and the same certificates, but that gives a result, of course, in only a couple of years. But I think you need both, and be transparent about it. I believe in different hubs of action.
Thank you, Janet. Guy, what would be your tips for, for companies, or for people actually, for leaders? How do they go towards more inclusive leadership?
I think that, first of all, it's a really cultural problem. We have to change the culture of the society, but also in our own company. And I think that the leader should be a role model. If you don't accept, I don't know the English word for misogyny. If you don't accept it, if you don't accept, bad, funny joke, I think that you can change the culture of the company, and you can be really a model to move on this way. By the way, I remember that I was really committed to don't penalize the women who came back of maternity congé and maternity leave. I changed the rule. It was 10 years ago, and I changed the rule to make the increase in the average of the company when they came back. And I was really happy, because when we had 2 years ago this index, I thought that this point has a strong value in the index. And I said, okay, it's good to see that there is a connection between my comportment, my own comportment, and the result in the company. And I think it has to be the same for all the leaders in the company, to show what is the good way and to the good behavior. The only other point that we can use to change is really, for me, the education, the training, the acculturation, because I think that if we don't do that, we will not have the base of this change. And one point also that we made in Open, and that we can connect to the first question of the beginning of the roundtable, is that I am absolutely convinced that in the future we have to change the organization, going from this hierarchical organization to flat organization. And we started in Open to make what we name the talent expertise squad team, which are completely transversal of the old organization. And we saw that now we have a new attraction, because the young people, when they saw that we have this organization based on the expertise, the exchange, the evolution, they recognize what they are looking for in startup, for example. And big company or medium companies or 4,000 people like Open could have attractive organization for this new generation.
So thank you, Guy. So you're mentioning squads. Janet was mentioning hubs.
Yeah.
Juan, do you have a concept like this one, or a recipe to tackle inclusiveness?
No, not a magic recipe, only a hint. My experience is that as long as you treat diversity and inclusion as other important business topics, things tend to progress. And how does that work? First, you make sure this becomes a subject to be discussed at the management table. It doesn't become a functional mission. It doesn't become a pet project of a manager. This subject is put at the middle of the leadership team table at the highest level of the organization. And then you start doing what companies do. They measure where they are with KPIs. they understand what's the gap versus the vision that they would like to establish, and this can come from industry benchmark or inspirational endpoints. You define that vision, and then you basically plot a plan and target people and incentivize people to close the gap between where you are and where you want to be, with a plan, do, review cycle, which is the same way you do whenever you are targeting to increase market share in a certain category, or when you are targeting to increase the mix of a certain value accretive product in your portfolio. Set targets, measure where you are, and incentivize your team to close the gap from going to point 1 to point 2.
And Juan, a bit earlier you mentioned the quotas, and I know there's usually a lot of debate around quotas, and it's driving a lot of conversations. What is your view about setting quotas?
I do think they belong to the dynamic I just described a second ago. Whenever you have a starting point where you are very far from any type of industry or societal benchmark, you have the responsibility to define percentages or targets to close those gaps. And in that sense, I like less the word quota, because it seems a bit like you are there only because there's a quota. I would like to talk more about there are objectives to cover your gaps versus where you should be. And with that philosophy, work to close the gap. Back to my previous point. It becomes another objective to achieve. High-performing organizations are doing that on an everyday basis, setting targets, starting from a lower point and defining a route and a series of incentives and plans to cover those gaps.
Thank you, Juan. And Guy, I was looking at you. You were nodding when Juan was mentioning quotas. Do you have an appreciation about this?
Oh yes, it's a long story for me, because I was really against the quota because I thought, like my wife, by the way, my wife, who is inspecteur de l'éducation nationale, is against the quota, because it's true that you can, in the first step, say, okay, it's a kind of devaluation of the competencies of the woman. They need a quota to progress. But at the end of the day, what I saw, and particularly with this Loi Copé-Zimmermann in the member of the boards, it's the real only way to progress. And we need to have quota just to have a result, because if we want to be fair like this, we can wait 100 years before any really move. And I think that now we have to continue in this way. Maybe you have to take care, because, for example, on the executive committee, you have other issues. For example, I come back in the digital industry, how can I have 40% or 50% of the COMEX with women if there is 10 or 15% in the company? You have to say that it's different in an industry like the digital and, for example, the banks, which have not this same kind of problem.
And maybe back to you, Janet. We've been talking quotas and quotas for women in ExCom and in boards. What is your take on this and on those measures?
Yeah, of course, the word quota has a negative connotation, because then people may feel devalued when they're nominated. I do believe you need in companies for the different categories, like, for example, in an airline, if you say for the pilots, it need to be 50-50, it may be take 100 years, but if today the pilots, let's say, with 8% of women, and in the new promotion that were started, there was probably 13 or 14%. I mean, give yourself those progress targets for the different categories that make a difference. And I think I'm just mentioning it. It's something that I think we have to watch. Many companies will have people terminated, have voluntary departure plans. I think we have to watch. I've read some studies from previous crises that women in the workplace, not just at leadership positions, but overall in the workplace, may be more victim of those plans. So I think it's something that we have to watch for, because this crisis may then put some companies at least back a couple of years where they were before.
Mm.
So I don't know if that's on the radar or some of the studies for you, Alix, but I think it's something really to watch. Yeah,
we will. Thank you, Janet. Turning back to our audience, I think we have many questions coming through the Q&A. I think, let me pick the first one. Someone is asking that, changing culture is really hard and it goes against cognitive bias. So maybe to you, Janet, because this person is asking if there are practical steps in the HR process to drive debiasing.
Well, driving debiasing is hard. I think the recognition already, if you say, well, there is a bias, is a good thing. But I also think there are small things, because in HR processes, you can do checks with your teams, like where are we recruiting from, who are our sources. You can also look at what are the sort of iconic careers, where do people who are promoted, where do they come from? I always do a check when we do salary reviews. I've done this for many years, and then I look, well, if the men totally coincidentally do not get bigger increases and more often promotions, because the bias is so easy to fall into. Do they get the promotion quicker, and do they get the increase faster? I mean, you can do those small checks, and it's not because people are not, are not good or they're not benevolent, but those are just healthy paranoia in looking at and challenging your own practices and your own biases.
Thank you, Janet. Juan, do you have also a healthy paranoia looking at your numbers?
I have a paranoia about my market share. Why wouldn't I have it around my diversity and inclusion progress? If you think it's important and it drives business performance in the short and in the medium term, I have to be equally obsessed about those two topics, among many others. To Janet's point, awareness is a first step. So by end of next year, we have an objective, which will be having 100% of our colleagues trained in cognitive biases, just for a first attempt on awareness. And on the small steps that you can take in order to make change, we have, for instance, decided next year to no longer doing 100% of interns, which typically are coming from the same business school, same socio-demographic profile, but getting a 50-50 split between interns and apprenticeship contracts, which are gonna open and broaden the geographical, socio-demographic origin and also career prospects of the young people that join the organization. So that's an easy decision to make. However, you need to be conscious to make it with a little bit of anticipation, because for us that means that our first apprentices will only join the company in September 2021. If we don't make that choice today, by the moment I want to have the change implemented, I am 9 months away from it to happen. It's only a matter of being a bit paranoid and planning about it, yeah.
And maybe to conclude with you, Guy, are you also a bit paranoid about something when you look at your numbers in your company?
I'm not paranoid. I am optimistic. I am proactive. I am absolutely convinced that the world, the future of this world is in our hands. And I think that if women and men are working together, people through the world will work together, we can make a better world. And the example of Jamais Sans Elle, of the organization of Jamais Sans Elle, is really the symbol of that. You have 400 men now who are saying I don't participate at a roundtable if there is not a woman. Like, you know, maybe I want to thank the organization that we move the date of this roundtable, because yesterday we signed an agreement with the Education Nationale Minister, and just to change all the behavior in the schools. And I think that we can change the world just with a small action like that. And I think that we can be optimistic for the future.
Thank you. Maybe one last question that we got, you know, this is about tracking, because in France especially, it's not legal to track against all dimensions. So for instance, race or religion. So how do you manage to, you know, keep a broad perspective on diversity if you can't really track it? Juan, I think you're on mute.
Yeah, I'm speaking on mute. No, I can tell that one, for me, again, diversity is much broader than things that you can measure and track. There are things that you can measure and you can see. There are things that you can measure and you cannot see. And there are things that you cannot see and are hard to measure. For instance, preferences in decision making. If I'm talking of psychological profiles, Myers-Briggs testing, insights, color, methodology, that's something that we deploy. And of course, they are on a voluntary basis. But as long as the tool is helping you establishing a good dialogue, it's one that people tend to embrace. For instance, we have deployed this insight methodology where you are yellow if you are more in the socializing, if you are red, if you are more on the pure achievement, blue if you are on the pure analytics, and green if you are more introvert, to make it very, very simplistic. And people are using that to preempt other people in a room on how they are more easily convinced. So as things get a bit normalized and they become part of the usual exchanges, people actually are using this not as an imposition, but actually as a tool to become more effective in discussions and interactions with their colleagues. So fully respectful, of course, of the law, you cannot work otherwise, but it's not only what you can and you cannot measure, it's also whenever those measures are allowing people to getting more effective discussions and richer decision making.
Thank you, Juan. Guy, maybe on this one, on the various ways of measuring, do you have any last comments?
No, like said Juan, it's the law. And by the way, I have many difficulties on the mixity, like I said, during this 1 hour. But on this diversity, there is not an issue for the IT, because in the IT school, you have the diversity. And automatically, in our companies, you find the people that you have in the schools. And I think that I come back on the solution of the evolution of the diversity and the mixity is the education and the studies.
Thank you, Guy. Maybe let's give the last words to Janet, especially on those measurements and what you can do to actually drive and track diversity.
Yeah, I think the measurements indeed are, is not, it is hard to measure and to track, because that would not go well with the law. But I do believe, you can use the tools that Juan mentioned. I also think a decision that you suggested is, take apprentices instead of always the trainees from the same schools. We realized also that when we do trainee programs, they're always their same profile, same most young men from the same type of school. So if you decide to also diversify those schools, even in France, look in different neighborhoods and work with local communities, you diversify the pool that you recruit from and the people that you bring in. I mean, the thing is that you have, again, you have to work with your managers, that they feel equipped to deal with that diversity in their teams. And diverse is then the way that people do not all think alike. So I think it is look for different options, but also help the managers so that they're at ease and feel equipped to deal with a newer situation.
Thank you, Janet, and thank you to the three of you for sharing so much of your views and your experiences and perspectives. I think it's been a very rich discussion. And for the conclusion, I'm now handing back the microphone to Thomas.
Thank you, Alix, and thank you to the panel. It was really superb. It was very deep. It was having 3 minutes for takeaways is even difficult because you gave so many informations. We started with an idea which Alix shared with us, that we obviously going to change norms, values, and benefits, which came back at the end because France is one of these countries where you cannot measure a lot of things, and maybe that should change. Then we came to innovation, and we cannot innovate if we're all the same, and that's pretty obvious, but it was said again. And the diversity of pool in terms of tracks was an issue which came back. Salary equality is obvious, but it's so long. It took us already 10-20 years to reduce it somewhat, and it just doesn't make sense that we can do faster on that. There was a nice comment, I don't remember who said it, probably maybe Ignacio said, missing he was back to basics and saying we're missing opportunities if we don't allow diversity of sales, if we don't allow these diverse approach. Someone said also, I don't know if it was Janet, a female CEO does create a different culture, and that's a real help, and then Guy said, diversity and mixity is not the same, and that was a point which came back quite often during that hour. I would say mixity is maybe a little bit more mathematical and easier than diversity, and diversity probably brings you even more than just mixity. We came back then to the cognitive bias. If you have just group thinking, if everyone is alike, it brings us nowhere. And tips for companies is the leader is a role model, and if the leader is a woman, maybe it's even more of a role model for the diversity aspect, and the change. It was, and we're gonna discuss in a month from now. We're gonna discuss future of work. It is obvious that the flat organizations are more and more important. The structured organization top down just doesn't work anymore, and do not work anymore with the new generation of mixity, of diversity, of being young, and so that came back again, and it's going to be a big introduction for our next future of work event. And quotas are help, and we should use them as a help, but only as a way to progress. So this has been really an amazingly rich event of 1 hour, and it was the most difficult for me to bring back to 3 minutes or 4 minutes. But thank you a lot. And I would like to add a last information. We, and this is related to Guy and to the Grandes Écoles au Féminin. We are joining the effort of Grandes Écoles au Féminin, we, the Insead Alumni Association, which basically will join the Jamais sans elle approach. And when an event of at least 3 people, we will have at least a woman. I think for the last years, we have fulfilled that and engaged to achieve parity. We were nearly at parity in the last executive committee, but we still have a way to go. And we have to teach more our alumni on cognitive bias. So thank you very much. The next, as I told you, the next essential event is going to be in January. So the slide will appear in a second, and it's going to be future of work. And the future of work is very much related to what we just said. In fact, underlining some of the comments we just had, the future of work came up quite often, and we're going to have a superb panel, and really it's going to be a very sort of conclusion to these 4 events on our essentials. So thank you very much to have joined, and you can share, your thoughts on your takeaways on the WOVA application. And thank you to have, been with us up to 8:30, knowing that our lockdown is going to be even worse than we thought in the next few days, and that very soon we will have to go to sleep at 8 o'clock at night. Thank you very much. Have a good night. Bye-bye.